for Africans in the diaspora. We started HoaQ as a mission to support founders who are building for Africa or for Africans in the diaspora, and we've been doing that for over 6 years now. Over the last 6 years, we've deployed over $4 million into about 130 startups with almost 1,000 angel investors in our community that are still backing businesses building for Africa or for Africans every month. So far, we've seen 12 exits in different shapes and forms, and we've invested across 12 countries, be it Nigeria, Ghana, all across Africa and its environs. Today, we are going to be talking about something very particular, which is building Africa tech infrastructure. So many things have happened over the last couple of years, and I'm super excited to be joined by great founders, investors, and operators in the room. So to get us started, I will start with Malik. Hi, Malik.
Yeah, hi, Fawakam. How are you doing?
Good. How are you doing today?
On my camera.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm doing great, thank you.
Okay, perfect. Good to see you again. To get us started, if you could share a little bit about your experience, about yourself rather, and what you're building at StartButton.
Yeah, got it. Hi, everyone. My name is Malik Bola Kale, and CEO co-founder at StartButton. At StartButton, we're essentially building Pan-African payment systems for global companies to expand seamlessly. So we connect global companies, whichever shape or form it is, to local processing across Africa, so you can process between multiple payment companies, orchestrate between them, and do your payouts without necessarily being local in any of those countries. So charge your customers in global currencies, receive your money in global local currencies, and still get your money back in the currency of charge, which is a global currency. It's essentially us building the pipes to connect fragmented payments ecosystem in Africa.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that introduction, Malik. And I will move on to our second speaker, Ashley. Ashley, do you want to share a little bit about yourself and what you're working on?
Sure. Hi, good afternoon, evening, morning, everybody. So my name is Ashley Immanuel. We started Semicolon because we saw a few persistent problems. So one is that startups and large corporates were saying their biggest constraint to growth of their companies was a lack of talent, and specifically tech talent. At the same time, we know a lot of young people are looking for opportunities. So it just made sense to address that gap. So we started with building a high quality entry-level software engineering pipeline through our techpreneurship program. We've trained about 1,000 of those, continue to run that. We also provide other training and upskilling, corporate training, etc. Just closed out a program for MoneyPoint the other day. But we also provide technology services. So we have a team, our Labs by Semicolon team build solutions for ourselves, for our partners. We provide outsourced services to tech services to companies across the world. And we do venture building, training, and other work for early stage startups as well to really drive that locally based innovation and job creation in Africa. So pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much for joining us, Ashley. And the final person, Ire, do you want to share a little bit about yourself and what you've done so far?
Sure. Thanks for having me. Yes, so I'm currently now like an investor and advisor, but for most of the past decade, I've been an entrepreneur. I co-founded Helicarrier, which was a cryptocurrency infrastructure startup. We built an exchange, a remittance platform, many different things. But now I sit more on like the investment side, and I work with, well, as an angel investor, but also working with a number of funds that are focused on deploying capital in the continent, and working as an investor, but also helping these startups as well.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Malik. Thank you again, Ashley and Ire, for joining us today. Just to get us started, right? One of the common ways Africa's tech ecosystem is being discussed is from a gap narrative. You know, what's broken, what's missing, what still needs to be built. But the reality is that many of the people that are building this have been doing this for over a period of years, right? But we are still almost stuck in the gap narrative where people are what is being portrayed out there is we are still building, something is missing, something is broken. And I would love to start with you, Ire, on you've built Africa's earliest crypto fintech product while you were building Helicarrier, right? What does it actually mean to build infrastructure here in Africa? And do you think that the gap narrative is true still?
Yeah, I think it's a difficult one because the framing of it is maybe not that helpful, but I think it is still somewhat of a reality, or at least that has been my own experience. Because I think a lot of times, all of the successful companies that we've seen today, not just in crypto fintech, but in other things, they've had to not only build whatever product they're trying to build, but also build whatever infrastructure is needed to support that. Very rarely are they just able to take a step back and say, okay, you know what, I'm just going to be Stripe, for example, like, and not have to also build whatever payment rails that need to exist for something like Stripe to exist. So I do think that it is still somewhat of a reality, but perhaps maybe the framing of it being seen as, okay, gap is not necessarily that helpful, because I think it's important to name because it is part of what the reality of building in this environment is, and it's part of what makes it challenging. But on the other hand, it's, well, I don't want to use the word rewarding, even though it is rewarding, but I think it also shows something that's like, we can still build these things, like we can still execute on these things. We just need to be aware of the fact that it might take a little bit more than if there was already, very stable infrastructure there for you that you can kind of just build on top of.
Thank you. And Malika, I would like to bring you in here. From a payment and regulatory standpoint, what does that look like in practice when you're operating across multiple African markets?
Yeah, I think the biggest issue on that front will be the fragmentation of like different systems. And different systems here means the infrastructure that exists itself, the regulatory regimes that exist across multiple countries, the lack of interoperability between countries, as well as the nuances to like culture and like even talent, right, across board. So being able to, so to speak, like abstract all of this like fragmentation and just make it simple is essentially what makes it like really, really different. And that's the difficult piece, right? And one thing that I always emphasize is that you don't necessarily like, it will be hard for you, or it will be harder for you if you have to do everything. So sometimes you should just also like focus on probably partnerships and building resilience. So it has to be like backup after backup after backup, because yeah, it can be very, very painful to do. And you'd also find that it's not necessarily that we don't have needed infrastructure, I think, as you already mentioned. But sometimes, I mean, the system is broken. You need to like piece a lot of things together. And it's like in multiple fronts, right? You're looking at the regulatory fronts. The law in Ghana is different from Kenya. So like, you're basically picking the law in Ghana, interpreting it, and then presenting it to users. It's the same thing with infrastructure. The payment system in Ghana is different from Kenya. Even the payment methods, like everything is different. So you're piecing all of that together and then presenting it and making it easy, right? The gap actually presents an opportunity. I totally agree with you on that. But again, making it simple enough for people to use is where the real work is, and that's where execution comes into play.
You're right. Thank you, Malik. And Ashley, from the lens of talent, what does it mean for talent building infrastructure? Can you shed a little bit light on that?
Okay, building the infrastructure to enable creation of talent, or building the talent infrastructure, or both?
From the lens of talent, right? They're the ones building this infrastructure. Can you shed a little bit more light on what it takes for talent to build this infrastructure that we need?
Okay. Yeah, it's a good question. And I think for us, that's a big part of why we actually started focusing on that talent gap as Semicolon, because we saw that there were like developers, right? But there weren't necessarily software engineers. The difference being, somebody who can write some lines of code, maybe carry out some specific instructions, versus somebody who has a broader foundational understanding of what it takes to build scalable systems, what it takes to build things like the required infrastructure. How do you put the different pieces together? So, for example, a lot of the people that we train do end up in financial services. And when you are looking at building as part of a fintech or a bank, you have to understand, all the different interconnections. And in fact, sometimes build that infrastructure. So things like your open finance, fintechs or solutions. So certainly, I think for us, and that's one of the key gaps that we still see really at all levels, including some people who are maybe selling, I don't want to say selling themselves, but even in like mid to senior roles, sometimes we see a gap in that understanding of how to really build at the level that we require, which is some of the training and support that we also provide established or growth stage companies as well. So definitely we found that's really critical. I think even if you look at conversations, for example, around AI, here we may not be building a lot of that underlying large language models, the infrastructure, et cetera, maybe some of that, but a lot of that work is probably going to be more in those middle levels of how do you even just kind of optimize your toolkits of AI solutions that you're using. How do you make sure you've got the right balance in terms of cost and compliance? And then, of course, at the top, how do you put like a customer-centric product on top of that?
Thank you for that, Ashley. Now that we're on the topic of, AI, what that looks like for talent, I want to also understand you've right now trained over 600 people at Semicolon, right? And with 90% of them coming from low-income backgrounds. Yes, the conversation around talent shortage, everyone still says, there are no talents, or we can't find the right talents. Where exactly is the disconnect? Is it a pipeline issue, or do you think the real problem is how companies are absorbing them, training them, and developing talents that already exist?
I mean, it's a pipeline issue, but we can talk about the responsibility of employers in helping to build that pipeline. So we at Semicolon, I mentioned, we run this techpreneurship program, training, producing strong entry-level software engineers. And we train a lot of university graduates. We train a lot of graduates who have gotten degrees in computer science, including from some of what you would think of as the best universities in Nigeria. They still have to come to us and work hard for a year to really get to that point of employability. So we've seen, and we hear consistently that the educational system is just not producing what employers require. And of course, as an employer, I also experience that if I'm hiring talent that I haven't trained maybe into marketing or finance or something like that. We see a lot of those gaps, both on the technical side, but also around a lot of what you call the soft or durable skills, critical thinking, comprehension, communication, teamwork, project management, etc. So we see that gap for sure, and we have to go back and really reevaluate and strengthen educational systems holistically. Now, why do we have that gap? A lot of it comes down to resources, right? Money. So then I do think there's a conversation to be had around how can employers who are all suffering come together and maybe partner and maybe even innovate around financing and addressing that gap. Because what we see now is some employers will run maybe graduate trainee programs or internships. A lot really do want to invest in building a talent pool, but they tend to do it in very disparate, fragmented and maybe low touch ways, because that's what's feasible for them, right? It's not their primary function to build a workforce. I think it would be great if we could explore models where we're working more collectively, maybe innovating around financing. For example, at Semicolon, because most of the people we train come from low-income backgrounds, but we don't want to water down the quality of the program, most of them take student loans, which was actually sort of an innovative for this market, something that we had to really work hard to put into the market and create. It's been a challenge to figure out the financing for a lot of reasons. But if employers wanted to collectively invest into a human capital fund, that we could, organizations who can train can now use to build that talent pipeline that we all need. Those are the kinds of things I think we should explore a bit more.
Okay. Thank you for that. Malik and Ire, hearing that, seeing that you both are founders and you've led teams, what would you say have worked in your various teams that has allowed you to grow your talent? I'll start with you, Ire.
Sure. Yeah, I think I definitely agree with what Ashley has said in terms of like, I guess, resources, especially working at a relatively young company, even though you want to, support the pipeline, supports like education, it definitely can be difficult. In our experience, what we did was we did try to run things like internship programs and had people work with us from, being an intern, and then hopefully work with them as they develop all the way into like a senior person. And I would say that really worked for us. But I also agree that it takes a lot of time, right? You have to also be willing to invest in and watch this person grow, not just from intern to like mid-level developer, but also like teach them the skills so that they can actually become a senior developer, and do that multiple times. Because of course, like once somebody gets to a certain stage, it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to stay with you forever, right? So it is a definitely difficult thing to do, but it's worth the investment to make over the long run.
Okay, thank you for that. Malik, do you have anything to add to that? That's what's in your team.
Yeah, I think you already mentioned the first part of what I wanted to say. We've tried a couple of things. One of it is even like trying people as contractors to just like shadow the full-time guys and see like if it works and if like they're actually a very good fit before we invest into hiring them like full-time. It's really difficult for us to like fire people, right, than it is to hire them. So again, we need to like be very careful with how we do that. So that's like one big way we've done it. But like other ways that we've also tried is to probably focus more on the soft skills, right? Which is what we found that a lot of people do not have, right? So sometimes like everybody can speak good English, everybody knows like one or two lines of codes they've done. But then they might just not be the culture fit that you want. They might just not be the one to like lift your team spirit, right? And at the end of the day, it still doesn't work out, even though like they seem to be the best talents you could possibly have. So the contracting approach to it actually worked for us for some time, but at scale it then becomes very difficult because like how many people do you want to hire on contract before transitioning the process of like evaluating and then determining whether like or not the transition, and then the whole process of even like hiring people to replace people then becomes super challenging. Another big problem that we've also had is like hiring like across like borders, like just in different countries, especially because of like the nature of our operations. The challenge there is like there's like very wide culture gap with talents across Africa, right? If you call, and I mean, I'm not saying this, I'm not saying this to say like anyone is not doing what they're supposed to do, but if you call like a Nigerian, for example, and this is like a typical example, call a Nigerian APM your time and say, oh, we need to get on this thing. The guy might grumble, but he will jump on it. If you call some other people in other countries and say the exact same thing, they're going to be like, yo, this is past my bedtime. I don't work I don't work like this. This is, you get like, oh man, and it can make things really, really difficult for us. So just like, and then I think that informs our decision to probably hire from certain places, or like just take key learnings from like how we hire people and then hire certain people more than others, not intentional. But again, we just need to focus on the guys that can actually deliver for the stage we're in. If we're like a Microsoft, for example, like everybody works. But we're a startup like with a very lean team across like multiple African countries. We scale fast. It's a totally different ball game, right? So that's some of the challenges and probably how we've looked at it. Like soft skills around people who are like very disciplined, hardworking. I think that working piece is like very, very important. But yeah, so I think I'll just stop there. But yeah, because I can go on and on this whole thing. But yeah.
Oh Lord. Yes, yes. Thanks for shaking that up a little, but thank you. Okay. To go into operational failure and scaling, right? Ire, you are a founder. Now you're an investor, you're an operator, right? When you look at Africa tech startups that are struggling to scale, how much of it do you think is a systems problem versus a people problem?
Hmm. I would say I lean more towards thinking it is more of a systems problem and like perhaps a difficulty in transitioning between the different stages of a company. Because I think a lot of the things that work really well for like a 3-person team is not going to work for like 50 people. And I think a lot of people struggle to know when to really like change, how to transition, how to do things like that. Because and it even goes down to like the people that you hire as well, right? Because the person that you hire that works really well in like a 4-person team where if something goes wrong, you just need the person to fix it and like that's it. It's not really going to work in an environment where if something goes wrong, there needs to be a process. You need to document. You need to be like, okay, so if this happens again, you need to be able to teach other people how to resolve the problem. So I think all those little things, people just really struggle to know how to yeah, their phone will even be switched off. um so it's like people somewhat struggle to know, okay, at what point do we move from, okay, let's just like move fast, let's just do things, to okay, we actually need to have systems so that this is going to scale as we grow. And so that's what I would say is like maybe the identifying thing. And I think it can be difficult because when you're maybe at that gray area, like 5 to 10 people, you want to start setting up these systems, but then at that point, it almost feels as if it's like slowing you down. So it's like, how do you know when to like make that call to be like, okay, no, this is the time when we need to actually make this transition? And I think, yeah, I just see a lot of people struggle with that.
Yeah, yeah. So what I'm hearing is as you start to grow, you need to start putting systems in place to ensure nothing breaks as you grow and scale your business.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not just about
Yeah.
ensuring nothing breaks. It's about making sure that, whatever processes you want to be like followed are documented in a way that people can, like if the person wants to switch off their phone for the night, things should still be able to work because other people in the organization knows like how to do the thing. It's not like everything just lives in one person's brain and then everything stops when that person decides to like go for holiday.
Yeah, thank you. And Malik, from a cross-border environment perspective, how does operational failure show up when you're dealing with different markets, different people? I know you've touched on, how different people work in different countries, but can you touch on specifically how you see it come into play outside of that?
Yeah, I think there's been like several examples on the call, right? And one key one is like transitioning, just like Ire had mentioned, right? So where you're working in an environment where things are fairly stable, it's a different thing, right? So you can set up like a once and for all kind of like process, documentation, and like all of that. But in Africa, it's a bit different because like contexts are shifting like every other day. Regulation is changing. There's like a lot of changes just like happening, right? And it's something like we sometimes like struggle with like a lot, like one, keeping up with all of those moving parts, right, at the same time, and then being able to like contextualize it such that you can pass it on to other people in the company, and then like nothing breaks. But whilst that would work in, like I said, a very stable system, it then becomes like way more difficult to do in Africa. I think AI has helped us a bit on that front, I must say, because I think that's where like agents come in, like by and large. So what we've tried to do on our side is just try to use like an agent to gather like all of the contexts, right, as things are moving very quickly, right, and then try to centralize that information within an agent, because like people move, people come and go. If you have somebody managing that entire like knowledge base and all of that, by the time they leave, it then becomes like difficult replacing them, and then giving that new person like all of that context. It's like you're starting afresh every single time. So what we've decided to do to solve that problem is essentially like get like one agent that takes all of the contexts, and like if anybody in the company needs answer to anything, you just like go to the agent, get the answer, and then just get context and then be able to run with it. I won't say it's like totally perfect yet, but again, that's like one way we found to do it. We've tried like hiring people for like AI for EA purposes, or like chief of staff and all of that. But when they leave, we go back to square one. Every single time they leave, we go back to square one. Even though you have like SOPs, SOPs would work, right, for the broad perspective or like the broad context, but there's like minute, like little tiny context here and there that could have impact like the whole thing that you've built, right? And it's not a major context. Like, and I'll give an example. So, for example, there's someone who has said in Francophone Africa, mobile payment works the same way. We've implemented it that way, and everything was working fine. And then one country in Francophone Africa changes their entire system or decides to have their own currency. That's like messes up the entire thing, and then you need to go back to square one. So I think that's kind of like the challenge that we see. And I mean, we've been able to leverage AI on that front to solve that. So, but the fragmented context and the ever-changing contexts on all fronts is like a very big challenge.
Thank you for that, Malik. And Ashley, we've spoken about how Africa is a fast-paced operating environment. Do you think that the talents or the people being developed today are actually prepared for how quickly the environment is moving?
Well, that's what we're working to build. But I think, as we mentioned, we're doing this partly because there's an unmet need by employers at all levels. So definitely, and I think that's a lot of what we think about, is not just building the talent that's needed today to go into an entry-level job, but how do we actually really build the workforce of the future? And the people who are going to be the future, heads of engineering or CTOs or whatever those roles end up being in future world of work, but they're able to deal with that pace. So I think really one of the key talent kind of outcomes that we talk about a lot and we train for is just the adaptability, learning how to learn. Sorry, I have a 9-year-old running around.
No worries at all.
Learning how to learn and being able to, kind of evolve, because the work will inherently evolve. So that's really a non-negotiable skill, I think, for all levels.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Malik. Thank you, Ashley, and thank you, Ire. Just before I share the last couple of questions, if you do have any questions, please, we will not be taking any live questions, so you can just use the chat again if you have any questions, and I'll read them out to our speakers. I will start with you, Ashley. If you could change one thing about how founders, investors think about building Africa's tech infrastructure, what would it be?
Oh gosh. I think sometimes I feel like we can partner more.
Okay.
So I think in this market, we have a history, and this is, what we've seen the large corporates do, right? Everybody does their own thing. They build their own company, they brand, even when they want to do something for public benefit, they've branded it. They create a foundation, they name it after themselves, right? So I think it would be great to see more partnership everywhere. I talked about partnership for talent development, but that also pertains to all other levels of investment. And I think also, even, we love to complain about government and shortcomings, but even having more organized industry so that we can interface with government more effectively, both in terms of communication, collaboration, and hopefully accountability. I think that would be great.
Okay. Thank you for that. Malik, what do you think that startups need to do differently from an execution standpoint?
Yeah, I think Ashley already mentioned one of them, which is partnerships. So I was going to come from a place of competition and say probably compete less and collaborate more. All right. So there's like a lot of everybody trying to do the same thing. And I'm like, you can't all solve the same problem. Like there's like multiple layers to these problems. You can actually pick a part of it, solve it really well, and let others plug in. Like, can we please have that? Right. Every time investors, for example, ask us that, oh, like, are you a payment company? And we're like, no, we help payment companies to connect to global companies. That's where we sit. We connect Pan-African rails that are otherwise fragmented. That is where we sit. I'm not going to build another Paystack or another Flutterwave or like, yeah, because those guys are doing really well, right? And it just makes sense for us to plug in and give the solution to others who would otherwise not have access to it. I think that's like where to solve. So for me, it's one is collaborate more, compete less. And then another big piece is the regulator sometimes is not always the enemy. So sometimes it's just good to engage them more. For example, like randomly, I was talking to a regulator at a particular conference, and then I realized how much they didn't understand how certain things work, right? It would be helpful if we have like startups actually going to these regulators and training them, or like organizing like training. I'm not saying you should probably like put your entire like business out there, but at least just help them understand the reason why you're doing what you're doing. And then perhaps that would also help them understand where you're coming from and then see how they can assist you. We've seen regulators in other countries, which is leading to my next point, supporting a lot of startups. And I would just like to also, last thing I would say is I think we're too concentrated on the areas we think are juicy. So if you ask any founder today, like, fintech, what countries do you want to start with? And this is something we have first-hand information to, like Nigeria, Ghana, Kenya, South Africa. So I'm like, okay, so what happens to Burundi? What happens to like Sierra Leone? What happens to like all of those places, right? Like there are opportunities there. Those places are untapped, right? Simply because someone has built something and is working well here, why not take the opportunity to passport it to other places and not just try to reinvent the wheel, right? So just like try to expand, try to like open opportunities for other African countries. Let's not focus on like the big five or the big six, as it were, right? Like let's look at other smaller countries that we can essentially harness the opportunities there. And yeah, I think that's what I would say generally to startup founders, even including myself.
All right, so thank you, Malik. And Ire, What's one thing founders and investors consistently underestimate about operational infrastructure and scale?
I guess I would look at like the local, like I guess African context versus Silicon Valley, because I think a lot of times people try to apply the Silicon Valley model mindset of operations, investments to Africa, and it doesn't necessarily work. So I would say I think maybe just an awareness on both sides, on the founder side and on the investor side, that the relationship might look a bit different because people are solving on the founder side, like I guess people are solving different problems. We've already talked about infrastructure, and even I think what Malik mentioned around regulatory engagements being so much more important, that kind of thing. So different things, different factors that make building a company here different. So I guess on the investor side, you should be more aware of that. Also just things like, I guess maybe reframing what sort of timeline and return you're expecting is not necessarily going to be the same timeline. I would say that, investing in Africa requires a bit more quote unquote patient capital. But also just not always looking at it as a negative thing necessarily, because I think ultimately you can have even larger returns through this. So I think just an understanding that investing in Africa is different. So an understanding on both sides, I guess, on the founder side and on the investor side, that relationship might look a bit different to if you were just like out of Silicon Valley or something like that.
Definitely, I agree on all what you've mentioned. Thank you guys so much for joining us today, and I would take a couple of questions from the audience. I know we are way past time, but please bear with us and just take some of our questions. For those of you in the room, if you still have more questions, feel free to follow the speakers on LinkedIn. Please don't badger them, but you could possibly reach out to them on LinkedIn. So I will take the very first question here, which is, what's the very first system you put in place before you lose institutional knowledge to attrition? Do you want to take that, Ashley?
Okay, the first system that you put in place before losing institutional knowledge. It's a good question. And I know we kind of talked about that timing, right? Because in the first phases of a startup, you need to be agile, etc. I guess maybe there's some habits to build into the team early around. I work with a lot of engineers. They seem to be afraid of documents. So even the ones who are talking to everybody about making sure that their code is well documented, etc., when it comes into like write a Word document or something, they're like allergic. So I think, and that's a cultural change we're still working on today. So I think maybe getting that, even a bit of culture, not necessarily just both culture and process around documenting things. If you want to build out that institutional memory, I think it's good, because otherwise you do end up rehashing certain things every time you bring new people in. I think some of the first alignment for a company is really around vision, outcomes, what does success look like? And that one, even that, is felt and discussed, but that can be documented first. And then the how, in the early stages, how you're actually achieving that vision, there might be some pivots and so forth. But I would probably start there.
Thank you so much, Ashley. This question is for you, Malik. What are the 3 major risks you see in building the tech infrastructure and scaling outside of your own market? What do you think?
Yeah, I feel like the very first thing is like the culture shock and probably like the context switching. I remember like the first time like in Kenya and someone says, "Oh, if you have M-Pesa," I'm like, what like what is this? I was expecting like just normal card payment, bank transfer, and that's it. And it was like, "Oh no, we use M-Pesa here," and then you go to another country, something else. So the fact that you have to switch context is like one very big challenge. And then having to understand like how infrastructure works in like different parts like of the country. For example, in Nigeria, if I'm trying to like if you don't have if your limit like the money you can receive, if the limit is lower than how much I send to you, the bank is going to receive that money and then notify you to come and like probably increase your limit or do like more KYC. In some other African countries, what happens is that payment just doesn't work, right? And then you don't know that, and you keep trying and trying and trying, and then it's like, oh, this infrastructure is not working or something else. And yeah, so it can be really difficult. User behavior is also something else, which is the reason why I advise founders to just test different markets. We've seen like startups launch in Nigeria, they've been here for a year plus, they're not really doing like super well, and they launch in like another smaller country, by the way, but because the smaller country has more purchasing power and is like has better quality overall, they tend to make more money even with less transactions in the new country than probably a place like Nigeria, right? So the fear of like not expanding shouldn't be a thing. I think you should just like, test as many markets as you can because you never know where like the opportunities might sit for you. So I mean, it's just like there's that fear of how am I going to do this? How am I going to do that? I think there are now like platforms to enable you test first and then determine like how you want to expand later. And I think the fear that most people have is essentially like expansion cost. There was a year we had an internal joke that, oh, this year every startup is raising for expansion. So expansion must be a problem to solve. But you find that the same people that raise for expansion, you go to them and you say, oh, you know what, I can make expansion easy, right? By doing ABC. And they're like, we're not ready. We're still, I'm like, but you need for expansion. Like, so what's happening? So sometimes like we've found that like founders are not necessarily ready for expansion. And I think it's just like being like mentally ready and knowing that you need to invest in a market is also like super important. We've expanded customers to like different markets, and in the first probably like 6-7 months they don't do nothing. There's like no transaction whatsoever, no business, essentially because like they don't see it as treating it as like an expansion and like pushing their product locally and seeing how they can actually actively sell in those countries, and try to like also invest in research. There's a lot of assumptions and very little research that we do, as I've found. And I mean, to be fair, it's not necessarily the founder's problem. Like, I'll give an example. Startbutton paid a research company like so much money for some research, and they never came through. It just looked like they put the thing on ChatGPT and then sent the report to us. I'm like, what is this? But I think it's like super important now that people try to maybe like invest more in research, and probably like we should have like startups that are also invested in doing quality research and getting enough data that founders can work with, because data would definitely be a major challenge for you anywhere in Africa. Not just because the data is not good enough, but sometimes it's not even available to work with in the first place. Or it's available, but it's in silos. It's sitting with like every other person who has decided to keep it to themselves, and there's really nobody aggregating and then just sharing this. So, I mean, those are like some of the key challenges you'd face. But like I said, I don't think those challenges should be like a bar to you deciding to expand.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that answer, Malik. Ashley, you've answered the question. You've answered this question, so I'll just keep that and go to, given the shortage of mid to top level talent in the tech sector, how would you advise founders who wanted to onboard a tech co-founder, CTO for new industry verticals to go about their search? Apart from talking to Semicolon, of course, what do you mean? You should be speaking to Semicolon.
Yes, of course you can talk to us. Yeah, so first of all, I mean, I think co-founder and CTO each of those, which can be the same or different, but they're both very challenging. So I think founders who want to onboard a co-founder, I would say it's like finding a spouse, right? I think co-founder, and funny enough, my co-founder actually is my husband, but that's unusual, and it's not for everybody. I think, but even if you're not actually married, it is a very long-term relationship. You have to have a lot of compatibility and trust and alignment around vision and values and other things. So I think that is something to not rush. And it's, probably working networks, taking a long time to, taking your time to really find that right person. And sometimes there can be staff that are hired as staff and then are moved into a co-founder position after you've found that alignment. CTO is like also the toughest probably role that we place for companies. CTO and the head of engineering. A lot of times I don't even like to do them. But if we find the right client and the right fit, or if the client really needs it, then I'll say, okay, we'll help you with it, because that is also quite scarce in this market right now, until the pipeline we're building grows, right? And it also is just, there's a lot around fit. So I would just say again, if you're recruiting for those roles, know that it's going to take a lot of effort. Go in with that mindset of taking your time to find the right person. Again, I think for any senior role, looking not just for technical skill, but that true alignment in terms of vision and values, I think is really critical. And then once you've kind of found those things and you're jointly kind of moving in the same direction, then it's a little bit easier to work out the rest. I know for early stage companies, of course, budget is also tight. So there's always this really tricky part where you need really good talent, but you just don't have money to pay for them. And sometimes it's just the reality, people's reality is that they can't always work mostly for equity for a few years because of the talent, the realities they're facing. So I think that's the other thing, to kind of look at creative ways to try to fund those, or maybe even if you really get a good system in place, you can do some fractional part-time, as long as everybody's you've been very explicit about what that's going to look like and what the timelines would be to transition. But yes, of course, you can also talk to us.
Yes, thank you so much, Ashley. And just one more final question for you, Ashley. Maybe if you could touch on how you connect the right talents to the right opportunities at Semicolon.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's kind of like I was saying, there's just a lot of, in a way, it's kind of scientific, but people are just more complex than anything else in our universe. So it's breaking down those elements of complexity and elements of fit. So as I mentioned, I think that the alignment on vision and values is critical, especially if you're in a startup environment. People just need to be bought in. They need to be committed to the problem. You don't fall in love with your product, but you want to fall in love with the problem, right? So you have to have that buy-in. I think, and then just ethics, ways of working, all of that culture stuff. You can have great technical people, but if they're not aligned, it's a no-go. And then, of course, in terms of their actual competencies, both technical and those softer, durable skills, we can break them down and just sort of, understand what's the priority. There's no perfect candidate, but do that fit as best possible. One thing I do like about training, and especially our program that's 1 year, is that you really know people when you've trained them. There's no fake facade that they can put up. So it's very easy for us to, as long as we know the hiring partner, which we can kind of get to know pretty quickly, if it's a new partner, it's pretty easy for us to do that fit when we're looking within our existing communities. But of course, like everybody, we're also looking at scale and efficiency. So we're simultaneously building out a platform that increasingly automates those elements of fit as well.
All right, thank you so much. Those are all the questions that we're going to be taking today. Like I mentioned, feel free to follow our speakers on LinkedIn and you can ask them questions. I want to say a very big thank you to Malik, to Ashley, to Ire for taking time out to speak to us today. We do not take this for granted and we are grateful for you speaking to us today. Thank you very much. Please, we're not done yet. Still stay on the call. We have a couple of updates for HoaQ members. But before we get into that, I see a lot of recruitment going on in the chat. Okay. Well, Ashley of Semicolon is here. We also do have a mailing list where we connect talents to opportunities. Now we're no Semicolon, but we would share with you the opportunities that we've seen from either our network, our portfolio, or our community members. So feel free to submit your details on that form if you're a founder or a talent. But like I said, we're no Semicolon, of course. But thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. I will hand it over now to my colleague Bolu to share a couple of updates with us as we close. Thank you again, everyone.
Hello, everyone. I don't know if you can see me. My camera is a bit messy. Yes. Thank you for joining. I'll just run through the updates pretty quickly. If you're just joining us and don't know what's going on, HoaQ is a community of angel investors, operators, and entrepreneurs backing, amazing idea founders that are building for Africa and its diaspora. And yeah, I'll just run through a few of the updates. Next slide, please. If you are in the community, we have a new deal. Buy Flowers is building the digital infrastructure for gifting, basically. So enabling people across Nigeria and the diaspora to send flowers, cakes, gift items across the continent. They are currently live on the platform, so please check them out if you are interested. Next slide, please. We have a couple deals that are still open, but are closing pretty quickly. Infrared is building an AI-powered document intelligence and verification platform. So companies can collect, validate, extract structured data from documents quickly, securely, and they're currently live on the platform. Dodo is a pretty interesting company building premium spirits for Africa. So premium rum for Africa that's plantain infused. It's pretty interesting. You can check them out on the platform as well. Next slide. Activate is building the operating system for creator marketing in Africa. So enabling businesses and creators to be matched, discover opportunities, and also manage and pay those creators as a company who is looking for creators. Next slide, please. So for those deals, if you are interested in any of the deals or you're interested in joining our community, you can join us and you get access to potentially investing in those deals. Our minimum check size is $1,000, so you can take a risk on something that you have conviction in. You'll be able to get a bit more information on those deals, read our thesis on why we think they're interesting companies. And now to events. This is pretty exciting, I guess, for most people. Next week on June the 5th, we would be hosting our first corporate event, the Africa UK Innovation Bridge 2026. It's in partnership or collaboration with Wimbart, which is an award-winning independent public relations and corporate communications consultancy that specializes in Africa and emerging markets, with POV as well, which designs market access and ecosystem growth initiatives and helping high growth companies to expand into Africa and into the rest of the globe. It's happening on Friday, that's June the 5th. And we're bringing together strategic players across African and the diaspora and tech ecosystems. So founders, investors, operators, venture capital teams, ecosystem builders, policy stakeholders, everyone is going to be there. People that are really passionate about shaping the future of cross-border collaborations. And the next day, that is the 6th, we are hosting our ecosystem party, Afro House Edition, which is an evening, of music, dance, conversations, connections. We've had pretty interesting events over the years, and if you are a member of HoaQ and happen to have been to one of our events, I'm sure you'll be excited about coming back if you are in London. Sorry, my screen is Wisdom. Could you please share the link to the event so people could just have access to, being able to register if they're in London? And my screen is gone right now. Apologies. Yeah, sorry about that. And with regards to our portfolio spotlights, we just wanted to bring a bit of attention to Bamboo, who have a newer product, Misan by Bamboo. Bamboo is one of HoaQ's portfolio companies that gives Africans real-time access to global markets or investment opportunities. The newer product is a remittance and global payments app made for people who live, earn, and spend across borders. Two major features that they have that stand out are their multi-currency virtual accounts in USD, euros, and pounds. And you can transfer funds across 15 African countries. You can also get a virtual USD card for online spending anywhere. You can scan the code on the screen right now if you want to check that out. Next slide, please. If you are a founder and you're interested in potentially getting access to a community of angel investors, you can go to www.hoaq.co, where you can find out a bit more about us, and you can also submit your pitch deck. So we review year long. So send it, and we try to get feedback to you as quickly as possible. Next slide. Most people know about our angel investment community, but not a lot of people, even though we say it every EMA, but we still need to educate people that we do have a fund. It's a $5 million fund. So if you are interested in potentially learning a bit more about how you can become a part of that or be an LP on our fund, please check us out via the website as well. Next slide. And yeah, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us on this AMA session. It's been a lovely conversation. Thank you, Ashley. Thank you, Ire. And thank you, Balakale. If you want to join HoaQ, you can also find out a bit more information via our website. And we look forward to, working together into finding and supporting the best deals that are coming out of Africa by Africans or Africans in the diaspora. Thank you so much again. It's been a lovely time. Just a final note, you can connect with us on socials, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, we're everywhere. So yeah, that's pretty good. And if you do